Good afternoon, folks. Sorry, we've got a bit of a late start here. We are just needing to get our panelists situated. So if you just hold on for a second. Did everybody get something to eat for lunch? Yeah? And everybody's awake? All right, good. Glad to hear it. Looking forward to a stimulating discussion with our panelists. So while they're getting ready, let me just introduce some of the folks that are on the panel. Of course, you already know Ken Weitzma, who shared this morning. Very stimulating conversation and discussion about faith and doubt. Did all of you get a chance to hear Ken this morning? Yeah? Okay, great, fantastic. So Ken is going to be part of this panel. Oh, and by the way, the topic of this panel is, what is it? Justice, the church, and social action. So we want to explore the intersection among these areas. Oftentimes, the issue of justice plays a bit of an uncomfortable role in the life of the church. And so we want to try and understand why is it uncomfortable and what makes it difficult and what are some of the successes, what are some of the models out there that have made, that churches have used to apply justice and use it as an effective tool through the local church. So I already mentioned Ken. So why don't you guys come on up and have a seat on the chairs. And while they're coming up, I also want to introduce Philemon Choi, who is, yes, a Hong Kong native, and whom obviously many of you know. And I would have to say that he identified himself as a youth worker. I would say he's the youngest looking youth worker I've ever seen. Yeah? Forever young. Great. So Philemon did you start the ministry Breakthrough? Or yes, he started the Breakthrough ministry here in Hong Kong, but has also in recent years, in the last 10 years, been involved with a church-based ministry looking at social action through the local church, and he'll be able to describe more about that. Our third panelist is Raju Bhagwat, the man sitting in the center. Yes. Raju is a well-traveled man. He's serving as a consultant to churches and organizations. He's an ordained minister with the Church of North India, has worked with World Vision in India. I got to know Raju in Cambodia because he came there to head up a church training ministry for Cambodian church pastors, and he's speaks at conferences and leads trainings all throughout Asia, especially around the issue of peacemaking and organizational development. Facilitation models for mobilizing communities, all of these things. So he has a broad range of experience as well. My name is Tim Amstutz. I'll be moderating the session here. We'll start off with a few questions for the panel, and then give some opportunity for some questions from all of you as well. Okay? Does that sound all right? Okay, good. Well, let's get started with a question. Perhaps if each of you could just reflect a bit on the whole issue of justice, social action, and how you have experienced that, both the challenges and the successes that you have seen in your own work and ministry through your own local church context. And then perhaps maybe an example that you've seen from other church contexts as well. And this would be an opportunity for you to perhaps give a little bit of background on your own church experience when it comes to justice issues. So, who would like to start? The young one. Okay. The youth worker. Why don't we start with Philemon?
Yeah, I was born in China and raised in Hong Kong. But then it was when I studied medicine in Canada that I described I am a Chinese. Yeah, because I was educated at King's College, Hong Kong. And every day we sing the anthem, God Save the Queen. But somehow, over there, I met a lot of missionaries, and Reverend David Adeney and so on. And there was a awakening call. Who am I? And one of the issues is, of course, I'm a Chinese. And I came to know the Lord in the last year of my high school, and I became a Christian. And that gave me a different perspective. But somehow, my training as a medical doctor, and eventually as a counselor, I learned to be very micro. You see, I work with patients one at a time, and I see counselees one at a time. And I felt good about it. And so helping one by one. Then it was 41 years ago. Now, through a lady, Josephine, I met her at the walled city, Kowloon City. I was invited there to speak on drug addiction to a group of young addicts. And it shocked me. How come in our city? I've never been to the walled city. And there is such a dark side. And then I met Josephine, and who was a lady who worked with young people for many years. But then there was an awakening call. I said, why are you here? You're recovering from cancer. How come you're here? He said, I want to look at the city and praying what we can do for this city. And that waked me up. You see, our young people live in the city. And this is a city full of injustice. So I began looking at my ministry more at the macro and structural perspective. Because eventually I was invited by the government to sit in various committees and various commissions. Then I get a lot of inside statistics. Then I discovered behind poverty, there's more just an act of mercy. There should be voice and act of justice. So tomorrow I'll be speaking on, in the plenary session, and I coined it justice in action. God has already shown us what is good, and he makes his demand on us very clearly, to act justice and to love mercy. And love is a verb. It's not just a noun. To love, loving acts of mercy. So eventually, 10 years ago, together with group pastors, we gathered together the Chinese-speaking churches, and we formed the Church Network for the Poor. It was an act of repentance, because we have individual small acts of mercy towards the poor, but we fail to respond to the structural sins and the injustice that's very obvious in this city. The most prosperous city in the world, and the poorest at the same time. And because working with young people, I work with all classes of young people, the most brilliant and the most deprived and the most delinquent and the addicted and the abused and the oppressed. So this has been 41 years I've been working with young people. And of course, I've given up my medical practice. So I've changed my profession because of God's calling. So for the past 40 years, I was and I still am a youth worker. Don't look at my hair. Youth work doesn't have anything to do with the color of the hair.
That's right. Thank you, Philemon. Can you just say a little bit about how you have seen the church either acting or not acting on behalf of some of these kinds of issues that you've described in Hong Kong?
No, I have to be very careful when I speak about the church.
I can say whatever I want.
Okay.
You don't know any of my church.
Is it on record?
Between you two guys.
And I have a most reverend here. I think the church in Hong Kong and the Chinese churches have marginalized ourselves. We have made ourselves very marginal and to the point of irrelevance. Because we build up walls, and everything happened within the walls. We call young people, we work young people, we call them to the church, and we convert them, but we do not keep them. You see? A lot of conversions every year. We just had a survey. But we get them inside the front door, and shortly they are out. And I said, what happened? It's something outside of the church. It's the world that is living in. They feel a lot of injustice. But I don't think they feel in our message, in our action, we are addressing them. We avoided them. So we make our message and the gospel so narrow. Our gospel is not about going to heaven. It's heaven, kingdom on earth. It's being light in the world. It has 100% to do what is happening in the world. And I think, so 10 years ago, a group of pastors, we pray, and then we responded, and we confess our sins, and we come together, and we respond. In this city, which is most extreme in the gap between the rich and the poor, number one in the world. Number one in the world. And somehow we are blind to it. And not just poverty, but other social issues. We somehow avoided it. And particularly last year, with a lot of political uproar. So even within the church, it's totally divided. And so we tend to avoid and keep things neutral. And so our message and our action sometimes are totally irrelevant. And the young people despise that, and they walk out. Yeah. And they respond with their feet. Yeah. And my heart is saddened. Yeah. How come? How come? So I come here to learn. And thank you, Ken, for bringing the Justice Conference to Hong Kong. It's a wake-up call to us. Why are we avoiding this crucial issue of justice? It's rooted in the attribute of God. Our God is a just God. And the cross is a symbol of justice and mercy at the same time.
It's significant, I think, that you mentioned that, that justice starts with confessing our own sins and recognizing the ways that we have fallen short in that. So thank you for bringing that to our attention as well. Raju, let me pass it to you. Can you talk about how you have seen justice lived out in the church, both in good ways or not so good ways?
Start with self. You become a pastor. Okay, I'm talking about myself. I become a pastor, and then I develop this huge Messiah complex. I want to save everybody. Okay? And so the biggest opportunity I had was the son of an industrialist in our city who was a heroin addict, and he became a friend of mine. And I went into this saving this heroin addict with all the zeal of a completely unskilled worker, because it's a specialist ministry. I didn't have any of the skills nor the training in that. The result was he stole my camera, and I had saved for years as a pastor to buy a camera. And he stole it and he disappeared. Okay, so that was my first experience of attempting. But I didn't learn. The second one was a family member who was an alcoholic, and every time I visited my friend's home, my cousin's home, he would be waiting down, and he would want a handout, and I would never give a handout. I would sit and have a meal with him, and one day I did a crazy thing. I said, "Okay, you come and stay with us." And my wife almost dropped dead of shock when she saw him walking with me. He ended up committing suicide in my house. So I made a lot of mistakes in my attempts at being a Messiah or to save the world, or being just, whatever, showing mercy. And it's not something that's easy. So I started studying about it. And the next thing that happened was this mosque, this old historical mosque in India that got pulled down by the Hindu fundamentalist groups. And that's when the riots started. And I was a pastor in Mumbai city. Churches are sanctuaries. And so we had Muslims being chased by Hindu rioters. And they would come and hide in the church, and obviously the Hindu rioters would come chasing after them, and I would have to stand at the gate of the church. Sometimes the big walls are good, and basically say, yes, there are people inside, but I can't let you come in. And if you want to get in, you have to it's going to be serious problems. These were the days without mobile phones, so you couldn't make these instant calls to police. And anyway, half the police are on the side of the rioters. And so even if they come, they'll wait about 500 feet away and watch your church burn down before they come in and pretend to stop the rioters. Fairly standard practice. By the way, I don't know whether you know this, but the Hindu fundamentalist group has how do you say it, an Aryan background? Aryan, okay, the same as the Nazis. And so in 1930 and 31, 2 years, about 132 of these Hindu fundamentalists went and trained with the Nazi party in Germany. And almost every strategy they use is something that was used by the Nazis against the Jews in Germany. Okay? It's the same strategies. You analyze it and you'll be horrified at how parallel it is and how similar it is. So that is the context in which I started learning. And the church did stand up during this situation. The church did speak out. But here's the difference. I work with an ecumenical church. So we are fairly liberal in our theology. We are linked to the World Council of Churches. So our theology is a bit dicey. It's a bit dodgy there. And so we speak out against these things. But the problem was the evangelicals that I'm a part of. I came to Christ from a Hindu family, and I was discipled through the InterVarsity. They would find that really strange that I would speak out and I would stand for these. And my evangelical friends would say, you shouldn't be doing this. You've got to be really careful. So that was a real tension that I had to face. So there is a whole ecumenical liberal brand of Christianity, of which I'm a part of officially, which says it is right to do it and speak out for it, even if we are a 2% minority in the country. But there's a whole evangelical tradition that says, no, we got to stay with our heads in the sand. So that's a tension that I struggle with. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Raju. Ken, you're a pastor as well as a teacher and philosopher and all of those things. What have you seen in the American church that either encourages you or discourages you in terms of the church's engagement on justice issues?
It's a different question than what you asked earlier.
I'm the moderator.
All of that thinking is completely gone now.
You can answer whichever question you want.
Okay, I'll make up a third. No, I think I'm really encouraged by what's happening. We come from a very unique place in the States where but in some strange way, I think our problems trickle out to the rest of the world through literature and whatever. I guess everything's now trickling to the States from Hillsong. So maybe that's polarities reversed. Is this being recorded? You asked. It is. Okay. Yes, it is. So in the States we had 100 years where two sides were really framed up against each other, and so I guess the big fight is tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, the Pacquiao Mayweather fight, right? So when there's a fight and there's a bell in between rounds, just imagine how strange it would be if two stools came out and were put in the middle and they sat back to back as they were getting their water. I mean, you know what I'm talking about? You go to opposite corners when there's a fight. And we know this when our kids fight, they shoot in different directions. When spouses, I mean, when anyone fights, you polarize and go to the extremes. I mean, that's just human nature. And so there was a fight in America, and it was really reaching ahead in the teens when the fundamentals, 90 essays, 12 volumes, which really birthed kind of fundamental language, defining what the fundamentals of Christianity were. And then when J. Gresham Machen in the 20s left Princeton Seminary and started Westminster, that was kind of the final thing that said conservative and liberal are not going to coexist anymore in terms of theology in America. And love and justice kind of went with the liberal strand, and Jesus and proclamation, salvation, went with the conservative one. And I didn't live through it, but I mean, if you imagine you have missionaries on the field that line up kind of in these two sides, being supported by rather large denominations, and all of this began to parse itself out. And so people being ripped, their communities being ripped into, and people being defunded because they reflected more one or the other. And so it was a pretty traumatizing thing. So in America, we get really down on all the denominational splits, but I've tried to empathize recently with what that must have been like, you know. And so anyways, we had 100 years of this split, and I think we had two extremes. And I think that just in the last 15 years or so, we've seen kind of a healing of that, where there's a middle way emerging that is both Jesus and justice, that's about sound theology and practical love that really manifests itself in communities for our neighbors. And so it's really taken the full gospel and saying this is all of our concern, not just these pieces, but all of it's a concern. And so that's where we've come from, and I think where we're seeing it go right now is an amazing thing. And the generation that's young right now, what they call the social justice generation in the States, I think is a big part of that. And why are they so wired for justice? I really think globalization is what accelerated that. Ease of travel, so many people going and seeing different parts of the world and going, how does salvation in Jesus not also translate to this? HIV, AIDS, you know, what Bono kind of made famous. So travel is a big part of that, and then just the internet and communication, because all of global injustices are right there on your computer screen, and God made us empathetic. Empathy is what carries us forward into justice when we can feel the experience of another, care about their suffering, and so seeing and hearing and reading about, interacting with what's going on in the world, I think forced a generation to say, if my Christianity is real, if it's going to be authentic, if it's going to be Jesus, it has to speak to all of these things, not just the women's ministry, the color of the carpet, whether we have pews or not, or some of the petty things. You know, I'm talking extreme petty, but there are times when those things were kind of what occupied conversation space. So I'm just really excited, and I was asked a question. I was asked to write an article a year or two ago on whether justice was just a fad. And I would just simply say, I don't think it is. One, if it is, there's worse things to be faddish about. You know, Justin Bieber or who knows what, right? So there's worse things out there to be faddish about. And the second thing is, when you analyze culture, there's pop culture and deep culture. And pop culture cycles through rather quickly. Are the jeans skinny now, or are they flared? You know, I mean, give it a couple years and it'll cycle through. Styles of music, whatever it might be. That's pop culture. Deep culture, that's generational distinctives. And so this is the way a generation is kind of shaped, etched, like glacial kind of etching into the rock. And so I think this generation, the younger generation, is really etched this way. They've been made aware of what's going on in the world. Their heart has been pricked by it. They realize it certainly has something to do with their faith, if their faith is going to be real and authentic. And so they're going to be wrestling with that the rest of their lives. Some of them have pursued degrees and taken career paths that they'll never really return back from. I mean, this is a great example. And I certainly don't mean to say this generation's finally getting it right. There's lots of amazing heroes of the faith through, you know, the last 100 years that did amazing justice work. It just was really under the radar, or it was labeled, and they were swimming against the current. I've apologized to several, what I would call the giants of the faith, or the ones that have gone before, because I feel like a fraud. I'm swimming in the current, which I mean, with the current. Does that make sense? You guys have currents here. And with, it's, you know, and there are a lot of people that had to swim against the current and kind of pave the way, I think, for this generation to have this conversation as deeply as we're having it. So I'm really encouraged, yeah.
That's great. That's great. Something you just mentioned, Ken, you mentioned about the impact of the internet and media on, as far as being an influencer for people's way of thinking and exposing them to broader realities when it comes to justice. By the same token, the internet and social media has also become a very divisive place where people state their opinions in very strong ways, and there's a lot of arguments, and I've experienced this even within my own family. You know, arguments that happen on Facebook that would never happen face to face. Have you experienced that? Yeah, and especially around the issues of justice. And what is the call to justice? So my question for each of you is, how do you promote a sane and compassionate dialogue on issues of justice? And again, perhaps within the context of the church, or maybe it has to happen outside of the church. But what are some of the tools, just to make it really practical, what are some of the tools that you have seen to be useful to create a dialogue when there seems to be such polarized views? I mean, you look at the U.S. right now, you know, on race relations, what's happening in Baltimore right now, Ferguson, Missouri, all of these things. It's become a huge issue there. How do you develop dialogue and pathways to communication in those kinds of highly charged contexts on justice issues? Anybody? Raju, can I pick on you?
Okay, this is something that I've been looking at since yesterday, actually, listening to some of you talk and discuss. One of the key things that we need to understand is that black and white with no shades in between, you know, no matter how many shades of gray there are. But that is the fastest way to polarize groups and people. And that is definitely not, how do you put it? Not the way to go about any kind of collaboration or coalitions. There are very few gray, whites and blacks. Most of it is in between. And another thing that I keep coming back to all the time is this absolute conviction I had that the doctrine I knew was sound doctrine and everybody else was unsound, you know. And over the years, I've realized that I'm a slow learner, so it's taken me 40 years to figure it out that, yeah, none of us really has sound doctrine. Okay? All of us have partially sound doctrine and partially unsound doctrine. So on what basis are we arguing? And what basis are we fighting and polarizing ourselves? Yeah? There is no sound basis for that kind of polarization, simply because none of us have the whole truth. All of us together are searching for truth. Okay? And that, for me, is the platform on which we come together. Okay? So here are the confessions of a reluctant, what do you call it? A reluctant collaborator. My first collaboration with peace conferences, okay, this was after churches, and the first set of systematic attacks on churches in India happened very quietly, and it wasn't published anywhere, simply because the whole district was controlled by Hindu fundamentalist groups. And that included the district collector, it included the media and everybody else, the police and all. And so it took about 2 weeks for the news to come out. Between Christmas 1996 and New Year's Day 1997, 8 days, 36 churches were burnt and destroyed by a gang of about 500 people who came in trucks in one small hilly district which had seen a huge movement to Christ. Okay? So in that context, I was sent in. Oh, Raju, you're from a Hindu family. You go in and do the peacemaking. And I was thinking, that's the fastest way to get killed. Yeah. But when your bishop says go, you go. You know? You can disobey God, but not your bishop. You know? So I went in. But the questions in my mind were related to how do we prevent these attacks, especially when they're politically motivated. And the only answer that I could come up with was interfaith peace conferences, okay? Peace advocacy by doing interfaith peace conferences. So I started doing that, and it took me about 6 months to figure out that actually the church, no matter which denomination you're talking about, and including the Catholic Church, none of the churches, denominational churches, have the capacity to do any kind of interfaith work, simply because we don't have friends from other faiths, particularly influential friends of other faiths, influential in their own communities. We just don't have those contacts. So guess where I found my contacts? Guess where I found the people? Okay? These were in the universities across India. And these were the Marxist cell groups in these universities, who were the intelligentsia. They were chancellors of universities. They were directors of departments. They'd written massive amount of books, all influential people, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis, Buddhists. There are 7 major religions in India. Okay? And the only place I could find anyone with links into all of these religions and the influential leaders of each religion were the Marxist groups. So I partnered with Marxists to do peace conferences in India, 60 peace conferences in 60 cities. That's collaboration. You can crucify me now.
I was just thinking it's a lot like this one. So online is, I think, really a big question. I mean, I think it's the dominating question. For 15 years, maybe, we've had online communication the way we have it right now. Out of how many thousands of years of human existence? 10,000, 20,000, 6,000, depending on who you're reading.
Well, I was shocked to read that.
4,004, I'm sorry. But
I was shocked to see that YouTube is only 10 years old.
it's only 10 years old.
Yeah.
So this is, I don't know that we have, as people, let alone Christians, have figured out what online communication and the speed of online communication is going to do to society. I mean, it's kind of this embryonic thing that I think is beginning to happen. But as I've thought about it, there's one conclusion I've kind of come to, and that's what I call the tyranny of fast-moving conversations. So the tyranny of fast-moving conversations is that you don't actually converse, you just trade conclusions. And it's when you discuss the premises, the reasons, the rationale, why you believe something with another person that's doing the same, that you really begin to refine some of your thinking and your views. And even if you don't change your views, you tend to realize that you hold them a little less strongly. So instead of being 100% zero or black and white, you kind of come a little bit more to the middle. Like, I still believe this way, but I can see how you believe differently. So when we have a deep dialogue, a meaningful conversation, education happens. So tyranny of fast-moving conversations, problem one is it takes all of the education, the growth part out of our dialogue. I think the second part of the tyranny of fast-moving conversations is that God has given throughout history certain people the ability to speak prophetically. And when they're speaking prophetically, it's to speak sharply and to correct where society's going, and with a really strong tone, and it's usually conclusions. It's you are wrong, and kind of to recenter the direction where people are going. And when everyone's speaking in a prophetic tone, it's pretty hard to recognize the prophetic voice. So I think what's happening now is we're all getting used to speaking very prophetically by tone, even though some of us might not be called or be prophets or have God wanting us to kind of speak to society that way. And so I think there's voices out there that we all need to hear, and they're being lost in the noise. It's like kind of singing into the wind. So, tyranny of fast-moving conversations is just the loss of the prophetic. And when we're talking about some of these things and trying to move to the middle and to learn what that looks like, the kingdom of God here, we really need those voices. And if we lose those voices, there's a real problem. So I think there's a lot of things that I'm watching, I'm seeing, I'm analyzing. And so with myself and with my staff, I tell them they need to think before they post, because they represent the church, if not Christ. Yes. And so gun violence is a big one. Something will happen, and you'll have people on both sides of it in the States. I know other societies would think, why is that even a debate? But in the States, it's a big one. Or race issues or whatnot. And so different people are going to see what you post differently, and you don't have the chance to nuance it. And so it's better to refrain from saying than to put something out there that's never going to have the nuance you would want it to have, and you might actually offend somebody. So I think that's all part of that listening more than we're speaking, and trying to fill in our understanding before we just rush forward with those conclusions again. But just some thoughts. I don't know if they're answers, but thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, some good thoughts. Yeah,
Well,
Philemon,
I
please.
always respond from the perspective of a youth worker. Now, the young, of course, they are on the web. But I discovered they are no longer really content just to be in the virtual world. And I think they are on the forefront of changing the world. Not just technologically, You see, the recent uprisings and revolutions in different places in the Middle East and including in Hong Kong are led by the young people. You see, there's two awakening. There's a spiritual awakening. They are after non-material
Yes.
gain,
Yes.
non-material satisfaction. I just read a book called Spirituality Revolution. The young people are leaving the church and structured religion left and right. 90% of them, they are gone. But they are searching for meaning, searching for spirituality, connect with, quote unquote, God. And they have various labels for God. But at the same time, they are very political conscious. They're very angry people. They feel the injustice, particularly in Hong Kong. They feel, why can't I make it? How come the price of the land is so big? How come I want to make a living on the fields and you take away our fields? You see, they are on the forefront and they feel it. Now, as young people, and this generation, they learn by experience. They learn through service learning. Now, I have my good friend here, Bill, and who's a very weird guy. And he's a migrant. He migrated from Hong Kong to Africa, and then he went to United States. He got his doctoral degree at Harvard, and then he came back to Hong Kong, and he saw the injustice of the migrant people in China. 300 million of them moving with, into the city and bringing their children. Now, so I followed Bill, and I went in, and in Beijing, we visited those living in the far suburban area, living in the garbage dumps. Now, and then eventually we bring young people to see it. And then we study it. Now, there's a lot of injustice. They don't even have the right for education. No identity at all. Totally marginalized. Then we go there and we study it and we launch something. We get 5 universities and we invite the university students to become big brothers to these marginal migrant adolescents. We did that for several years, one-on-one. And they are both changed. You see, those brilliant kids in the university. I've lived in Beijing all these years. I never realized there are people living among us like this. And then those who are marginalized, they discover they have a way. There are people who care. And they want to be motivated and to move. And eventually we did a study and we give a proposal to the government and said, bare facts. We cannot ignore these people. And there's justice issue, there's financial issue, there's a job issues, but basically it's a human issues. They are human beings, co-human beings, and they should have shared rights. Now, so actually it's through action research, through bringing the young people into the real sites. And then, of course, you have to do some debriefing. And what's behind it all? And, of course, some theological reflection. Now, it's not as simple as just poverty. Poverty is not just a financial issue. It's a justice issue. And so actually, through this kind of learning, young people change. And they find their calling. And they respond. And so I believe we have to trust and believe in the younger generation much more. They will really lead us the way because they are the most sensitive. They are both the victims of injustice and they are conscious they can and they want to do something about it.
Excellent, excellent, thanks. Okay, we've heard some great comments by our panelists already. I'm sure a number of you have questions that you'd like to ask, so if you have a question, raise your hand. I will bring a mic to you so that we can all hear. And then if you want to direct your question to a specific panelist, that's fine. Or if you want to direct it to the entire panel, that's fine as well. So it just indicates as such. Excuse me.
Hello. So this is a question more for Dr. Choi. So you talk about the younger generation, how we should trust them a little bit more. And so with all these things that happen in Hong Kong, I guess my question is asking, so us as a church, how do we actually stand to support the generation or how we I mean, sometimes very, very difficult when you in a situation, and if you try to say something, people are going against that, because there's always two different sides. As a church member, or as a church, that how do you actually respond to all the social movement actions that happen at once? I guess that's a question that I want to ask. Thank you.
May I have your name, please?
Vincent.
And what are you doing?
I am a pastor at Divine.
Okay, good, good. I just want to make sure. Now, okay. Now, actually, as Christians, we're called out of darkness into light. But that's only half of the cycle. And we are sent from light into darkness. You have to go in there. So for the past year, together with my other youth workers, I've been in all the sites where the demonstration have been happening. Of course, I never wear any ribbon. No yellow ribbon, no blue ribbon, no ribbon. But you go there and you listen, you'll be surprised. Actually, deep down, I think they are longing for something they call justice. Of course, political justice is only relative. You see, in politics, there's no real 100% right or wrong. Go through the Bible, I haven't seen an ideal democratic system that really works, okay, all through the years. So I don't think we get into that kind of relative argument. Eventually, we met a lot of them. Some of them are medical students. They go there, they want to protect others from being injured. And there are others who are there, just want to see, and they want to learn. And of course, there are those who are extreme, and they have a very strong political stand. And in politics, you see that those people, they have two faces. When they're facing the crowd, I listened to many of them. He said, I'm so touched. This is the first time. There's 100,000 people listen to me. And you change. You have a public face. You have a public face. But deep down, inside there's a human soul. And it's very divided. They're not sure where to go. Now, so I think you have to face them when they are in the public camera eyes. And particularly one of our young person has been put on the cover of Time magazine. And that drives him crazy. You see, so you have to look at them. Everyone created in the image of God. God created us, there's a sense for goodness, and there's a sense for righteousness. But unless we are redeemed by Christ, we cannot really put it right and act it out. So it's a long journey walking with them and listening to them and mentoring with them and walking with them. They are struggling. And actually, every one of us, we don't have an answer, right? Does anyone in Hong Kong have a solution to Hong Kong's political chaos? Right? You will win a Nobel Prize, right? Right? No solution. We are totally got stuck. And similarly with United States. You see, Francis Fukuyama, political development, political decay. And he analyzed a lot why United States is running into political decay. Got struck, hung parliament, globally. Now, so we are in a situation where the worst of the government is coming out, and I agree with Melba. He said we are not living under Romans chapter 13, we're into Revelation chapter 13. And because I'm just leading a group of Bible study with young people, we study Revelation. We study the seals. I think we are right into the 7 seals. Okay. Coming close to the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls. Now, so I think we have to look at the world from an eschatological perspective. In the final days, it's the darkest of days, and it's the brightest of days. Both happening. The beast is very active, but at the same time, there will be a lot of spiritual awakening, a lot of people coming to know Christ, parallel. And so I believe when we look at it, it's a paradoxical, the darkest of time and the brightest of time. And so as a young person, I still believe in them. I still believe in them. But they are looking for, they're struggling. They don't know where they are going. And I tell them, I don't know either. So we're in the same boat. And they're like people who are in the same boat. You don't pretend you have an answer, right? Right? Can you quote me a Bible verse that will solve the political chaos in Hong Kong? Quote me one verse. Right? We don't pretend it because they are sick of people who pretend they have the answer. I think the church always say Jesus is the answer. I always say, what is the question? We should acknowledge there are more questions than we can answer. We know so little. You say a medical doctor, I know we know so little. Right? We pretend we know everything. You go to every medical doctor by faith.
Ken or Raju, do any of you, either of you have any comments you want to add?
I'd love to just add that I really appreciate your enthusiasm for the youth. Jesus was the first youth pastor. Most of his disciples were teenagers. Probably Peter was maybe late teens, early 20s. Can't know for sure, but in that rabbinical system, several of these disciples would have been teenagers. And so, just thinking about the youth movement that Jesus led, I do think it's youth that changed the world. They have the reckless abandon, they have the passion, they don't have the encumberment that someone like myself does when you get older and you have the 4 kids. And even Paul warned me, I didn't listen. But I think here's the key. So in terms of your question, Vincent, I think youth has to be a part of any change. But I think it's looking for inspiration on what to do with all that energy. And I think youth that aren't guided or mentored or encouraged or even blessed by the older generations, the natural energy for youth is destructive energy. I mean, that's why teenage boys are so good at, what is it called when you break things? Jet lag. Vandalism. It's not called jet lag, it's called vandalism. But when I was in high school in the States, and I won't tell you anything because my friend Jared will use it against me. He's not fond of Americans, but a lot of vandalism happens because you just have time and all this destructive energy. And I think if you add all of that with something that you really, an injustice, your answer can be to win or to destroy or to vent. And I think that the goal here is that the older people that can encourage or affirm the younger people, it's to help them realize creative energy is how the world really changed. Picking on Jared again, his ministry, Love Makes a Way. Love does make a way, but it finds a way. It looks for a way. It's creative. Recently had a conversation with another person who's toying with this idea of a theology of creativity. And the idea is that before God created people, he created or made space for life. And that when you look at any injustice, whether it's taking the land in any number of countries, you're removing space for life. If you look at creative impulse that's allowing people to flourish, whether it's a home or job or economics or political systems or whatever it might be, you're making space for life to happen. And it's how beauty grows and society changes. So I think inspiring young people that we will hand the reins or pass the baton or whatever, but let's guide them with some words. Jesus' disciples, even at the end, they're not recognizing you, Jesus. Should we call down fire on this town? Or competing with each other. Who's greater? And they're like literally fighting with each other. And Jesus is really... And then a little while later, he's sending those same disciples, or those same disciples are being sent back into those communities, again, to suffer, because unless a seed dies and falls to the ground, it can't bring forth life. But it's all that creative energy of what could be. And I think that's what youth need, is that vision of taking and sublimating the destructive energy into something more sublime or creative or beautiful.
Great, thanks. Raju, did you?
Just this whole aspect of the energy and the enthusiasm that young people have, combined with the idealism or looking for good things, looking for the best in people and in society. But how do we create these spaces? And that's primarily a key part of our struggle as youth pastors. So, I'm a youth pastor, by the way. It's just that the youth I work with tend to get older and older. So but I've still taken them on zip lines and sailing and kayaking and snorkeling, you name it, yeah. It's like all the 60-year-old senior pastors in Cambodia. It's fun. Yeah. I want to get onto that zip line. Okay. But how do we create the spaces for community, for a just community? That is a key part of what we do. So whether it's young people or whether it's older, but that is a key aspect. Channeling all this energy and the creativity and the skills that young people have, or older people have, into the kingdom of God direction. How do we do that? That really is what we keep functioning on. And it's incredible joy when you see young people, or older people, moving in these directions of recognizing that the kingdom of God is actually much bigger than the church itself, however you define church, and creating these opportunities outside of our normal paradigms of church for people to get involved. You know? So, like for instance, what I do in Cambodia is, if you come to Cambodia, your orientation will be a tour of the dark side of Phnom Penh city. So you will visit the site where a union leader was assassinated, etc., etc. Yeah. But that's a part of just looking at the realities and all the justice issues that happen in a country like Cambodia. Okay. So how do we create these spaces?
Just one sentence. Now, he just mentioned the word create space. Now, as a young youth worker again, I like Parker Palmer. Now, he had one sentence that really influenced me. He said to teach, to lead the younger generation, is to create space in which obedience to truth is practiced. Now, I think in the city, we can create space, where the real space, and they like to go in. But the key words are obedience, act, but based on truth. Yes. And actually, the younger generation, they're looking for truth. Yes. They look for it.
That's right.
They have their definition of truth. Practice. I don't think the church should just talk about it.
Yes.
We can afford to make mistake, but you go in and practice what we talk about. And really, obedience, of course, we know ultimate obedience, and we know the author of all truth. Now, I think that really helps me as a young person. Space. Yes. They need space. Yes. They are oppressed, and they don't have that kind of space.
Great, thanks. Actually, I saw some other hands, but Steve, did you want to relinquish your question, or do you want to go ahead and ask a question, since you had your hand up earlier?
No, I was just going to follow up that question in terms of acting. Because awareness without action, of course, is just greater apathy, right? So that's what the internet has done. It's increased our awareness, but we have to act. And so as a church, what's the first step? I mean, I hear you saying, Philemon Choi, just get in there and learn as you go.
Can I push back on it? Not what you're saying, but that idea that awareness equals apathy. I think what we're missing there is, yeah. Oh,
sorry.
Someone's calling us.
We need to wrap up. Okay, can we take 5 minutes? Okay, all right. 6 minutes.
I think what I'm just saying is education, I don't want to see us blending awareness and education into one thing of mass information and we can't separate it out. Education that actually transforms your inner structures and fills in blank spots is I think so crucial to this, because I think my life's calling has been, if I were to sum it up, is to realize that we create bad safe spaces in religion where we can choose ourselves, opt out. You know, it's great justice, it's great Jesus said this, it's great martyr that, but I found a verse, I found a tradition, I found my denomination. Really the main thing is this very comfortable thing, and I can stand here and give myself permission to not have to engage. And I think there's something really powerful about removing those as viable safe spaces and showing people that that does not exist. There's no truth there. And when people begin to grapple with, I don't have an option but to face the stark claims of Christ, that there is a cost to discipleship, That there's something really transformative in that. So I know that's not what you're saying, but I think there's a role for words. I think I hear a lot that enough words, more action, and I want to say better words, more strategic words that force people to have to grapple with the things that are going to lead to action.
Now, one sentence again. Okay. Now, because now, Parker Palmer again, another book, The Active Life. One sentence. To be fully alive is to contemplate, and to be fully alive is to act. And I think our church has lost the tradition of contemplation. Contemplation is to be silent and be still and know that He's God. And in silence is the Holy Spirit that guides us into truth, into discernment. Now, action without contemplation can be very dangerous.
Yes.
And contemplation without action is a sin. Now, so I think as a church, we have lost both tradition. We just sit here and talk, right? Now, contemplation is not just about talking. And acting is about contemplating. Silence before the Lord and who speaks. And we move with the Spirit. And we move with the Spirit who guides us into truth and rooted in truth and actions, love, justice.
Raju, quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, just taking up on the education part is, okay, you use the word awareness. When we talk about education in the true sense, I'd rather use the word training, and then I look at Bloom's taxonomy. So you're looking at knowledge and attitudinal change, and you're looking at skill development. And all of that has to result in habits, which are a lifestyle, which is Christ-like. Okay, so you have K-A-S-H, cash, spiritual cash. But knowledge itself has 6 levels. Okay, and you've got memorization, you've got understanding, and the third one is application. And I used to get so excited when I ended my sermon with an application, until I realized that Bloom's taxonomy has another 3 or 4 levels, the new one, you know? And those are the higher order thinking skills. So do I lead my young people or my congregation into higher order thinking? You know, analysis, developing a hypothesis, putting it into practice, evaluating it, and then creating something new. What about awareness? It is only creating an awareness about what I don't know, I need to know, or is it actually developing a new attitude which is Christ-like? You know? Stopping discrimination, yeah? Or whatever. You know? Or skills. We say, you know, the lowest level of skill is copy. You imitate someone. But the highest is competency, subconscious competency. And all of those put together is what produces a lifestyle. So when we do training, a part of what we do is, like in 20 days of training, if journaling is a practice I want someone to develop, in 20 days of training, they would actually journal 60 to 80 times. Okay? So that hopefully, because they've done it 60 to 80 times over a space of 20 days, maybe spread over 4 months, they may have a chance of developing a new habit that will actually equip them in a far better way. So that is a key part of church. We are so focused. I have been so focused on content and sound doctrine that I neglect the higher order thinking skills and that people need, and which are the key for social change. Just in closing, I love justice. I can sit for months and watch other people doing it. Thank you.
Actually, I think we can squeeze 2 or 3 more minutes out of our time here. So let's just take one more question, okay?
Hi, my name is Mian, and I'm from the States, but I work in Bangkok, Thailand. And my question, just speaking about the church, is I won't ask how, because I think that's a hard question. I think that's a long answer. But why is it important for churches to work together? Because I think we often will try to do it on our own, but we don't extend to working with other people. And I think collaboration is, I think, something that we lack.
Ooh, I love that word. So if Paul, who kind of took a very simple Greek word for gathering and kind of baptized it and made it this symbolic, significant word, church, I think if he was alive today, he would do that with the word collaboration. And I think when we work together, we're serving a higher thing than our self or our tribe. When we're competing with each other or not working, which, you know, not working together is just another form of competing, then we're somehow serving another agenda. And so that's, I think it's competition versus creation. And I'm naturally wired for competition. So as I'm now progressing into my old age of 42, no, I think that's the thing that I'm having to kind of go back and say. I grew up in the age of American churches where go and create something big without reference to anything else outside of that church. And I think I'm realizing there's a higher vision. Go and create something really incredible in collaboration with others. You know.
Another simple reason. Collaboration, another simple reason. If you're alone, you get targeted. If there's many, it's a lot harder for them to get you.
How many of those do you have? Start writing some down.
Okay, I think that we're really at the end of our time. I'm not sure that we really extracted everything from that collaboration issue. Any of these questions could have used a lot more discussion. So make sure to grab these guys when they have a free moment, have some dialogue with them. Otherwise, you're free to go to the next workshops, which start at 3 o'clock, and there's another one starting here, I think. Yeah, there's another panel, I believe, that's meeting here. Thank you, panelists.